Hi guys, welcome back to Snakes and Adders. This is just a follow-up video to the thermostat one we did the other day. A couple of comments that went on YouTube. John Schlesinger, who's followed my channel for years, mentioned something pretty obvious that I left out. I wanted to review that, just make sure we've got that in there. These what we'll call blackboard lessons are very much designed for the beginners or new keepers that have entered the shop trying to fathom out the mechanics of their enclosure. I'm sure other people will find it hopefully useful too, but that's who it's designed for. So very much designed with beginners and novices in mind. So I've redrawn out the basic nets for the vivariums, and this time I've also included just a generic arboreal rig so that we can hopefully try and explain the way that we do things. One thing I did want to cover, which we did in the first video, and it was the way that the vents work, where they exhaust the hot air out of the high vent and cool air is dragged in. And it dawned on me that I drew the Viv with a vent in all four corners, and certainly with some smaller Vivs that's not always the case. I know a lot of the Viv exotics, they tend to have a high vent in either corner, but I know some of the smaller ones, Reptilife, Reptilux, and I don't know about the other makes like ND or any of the others that are on the market, but I just thought that I would go through a simple placement, absolute basics. If you've got a smaller Viv that has only got one high vent and one low vent, usually at opposite ends, your heater is forced to be where the high vent is, and this is because it is the exhaust. This is then through convection and air rising, it's going to suck the cooler air in, and that's what helps to create an air cycle and keep the air fresh. So relatively simple. When you're planning out your Viv and you look at it, check where your vents are. High vent, that tends to be where the heater goes, so that we can use that as an exhaust. Simple but effective. If we mounted this at the other side, the heat would gather and it would take longer to drift along before it was then exhausted and the cool air dragged through. That might be beneficial for tropical enclosures, but if you were running something that was arid, semi-desert, montane, you would kind of want that gradient to be sharper, whereas with the tropical species it would be shallower. So yeah, if you're going to mount your heater, mount it towards the hot side. The basic element that I left out, which is pretty essential from a safety perspective, is a cage around your bulb, so that you can make sure that the animal does not gain access to the bulb. And this is as much to protect the bulb as anything else. Some lizards with long tails use their tail as a counterbalance, and when they jump off, say, a log or basking thing, and they use that tail, it might whip above their head, and these bulbs are incredibly fragile, so just be careful. That's why I advocate for the use of them. I know some people argue, well, they can hang on them. It's true, but I've also known some bulbs, the soldering from the cap to the glass itself isn't brilliant, and certainly if there's a surge or the bulb blows, there's been many reports of finding the bottom of a bulb in the bottom of a tank, invariably where for over the distance it's fallen, where it could have smashed, particularly if we're not using a cage. So if that does happen, at least this is going to catch it, and more than likely it's not fallen far enough or with enough force to smash all over our reptile's enclosure. The other thing that I wanted to talk about was when we were placing our decor in the vivarium, and we have set our basking site, so we'll draw the king again like we had last time. One thing that I did forget to mention was what we're creating effectively is a no entry zone, no man's land, and it tends to swing almost like a compass circle, maintaining the distance, and this becomes no man's land. And by no man's land I mean that I don't want any decor to go in there. If we're setting, by definition, this is the basking site, anything that goes inside that red zone is now the basking site, because it will be at a higher temperature than this, and this is supposed to be peak temperature. So this is why we have no man's land. So if we were going to have any climbing apparatus or logs, they would go up towards the cool side instead. And again, we are providing security by being able to hide along the thermal gradient. Water bowl always comes to the cool side to try and keep it cool and as fresh for as long as possible. Reptiles don't really like warm stagnant water, and they like a refreshing drink as much as anybody else. And then also a handy point as well, a lot of the plants that we sell, certainly this is more for snakes and adders centric customers, they come with a plug system on the floor, on the base here, and we tend to use cork bark. And what I find really useful is if we drill through the cork with a 10mm drill bit, we can actually bend the shaft of the plant, and once we've drilled through the cork, when you pull it through the hole, you might have to give it a wiggle, it will stand up and you can create shrubs effectively, and it gives a better, more naturalistic 3D effect, particularly for, say, grassland animals. You know, and a lot of the plants on the market, unfortunately, are trailers, which is fine if we're setting up a rainforest tank. But if it's scrubland or semi-arid, and we can set up a nice pack of plants, and we're going to use the cork as the mounting apparatus to be able to do that, then it's easier to fill. There's nothing wrong with then adding trailers occasionally as well. But for the most part, I do quite like this shrub design and shrub idea, and anybody who visits the shop, you'll see that we've used that almost exclusively in our enclosures. So a useful little tip. So again, this isn't going to be as in-depth or as long as the other video. It's just going through some of the rudimentary basics. What I didn't cover in the last video is arboreals and potentially the mechanics and how they're set up. So I'm going to pick an arboreal snake, but it could as easily be an arboreal gecko. But some of the rules that I'm going to come up with don't necessarily follow with the geckos, because they can obviously access right up to the mesh, and the hope is that they're just going to descend when they want to cool down. There's not much else that we can do. We tend to set a sort of distance from the mesh lid, say of an Xterra or a Zoom Ed or Pro Rep, or you know, the Habitat ones. They're all much of a muchness. They're very, very similar products, but universally they've got a mesh lid, and we're going to set a certain distance. This is usually, say we were in a 24-inch tall tank, I'd kind of want 8 or 9 inches from the mesh, and this would be where the first perch would be. This is to allow enough wattage to enter the vivarium to maintain the basking area here and make sure that your bottom end isn't completely frigid. And even then, for really needy stuff, if it's a tank in isolation that's not in an established reptile room that benefits from the gathered collective heat of all the enclosures, there may well even be a need for some low-level heat, maybe via a heat pad, one of the adhesive ones stuck underneath, so that we could keep a bottom end temperature of around 25-26 degrees. This is more for tree snakes, maybe green tree pythons and things. Again, not a beginner species, but this is kind of the way that we work out the mechanics. Your sensor for your thermostat will drop down to a similar height, and then we will have our digital thermometer probe, and we can mount that on our basking area as king. The joy is that between point A and B, the king and queen, the distance is really close together, so generally you can keep a really accurate bead on it. And then you would pair your UV light at the same side that you've got your dome, so that the light and heat are together. And then obviously our photo gradient runs vertically. There is a slight amount of shade, and this is where your billowing plants and trailers come into their own, because that's how we're going to recreate that rainforest vibe. And I suppose in the background, particularly if it's an Exoterra with the polystyrene background, you can mount those plants that I showed you that we stock into the background as if they're what's called epiphytic plants that are sprouting out of the cork bark background. And we would also again make sure the water bowl is at the cool side, and then any caves or other hiding opportunities at the floor you can then mount as well. Obviously with geckos, the temperature requirements are usually pretty low, usually max out at around 30 degrees for say tokays, 28, 29 for day geckos, 27 for most of the New Caledonia stuff, and they can come and go as they please. But this again, the principles remain the same. We're just changing the orientation, and it was just little things that I wanted to go through, and this way we can ensure that the animal can enjoy the opportunity to move around the enclosure, interact with it, have some sort of environmental enrichment without necessarily putting them at risk. So this is what, with the snakes, certainly with the arboreal stuff, all decor, same rules as here, would be out of no man's land. Like I said, with the geckos, there's just no avoiding it. Their sticky feet allow them to go all over the place, so you can't really fight it. There's a new trend coming out as well. A lot of people are starting to use these cool things called sky hides, and sky hides will mount to the ceiling, and you would use the tracking that they use for vivariums, and that would hold it either side, and it can slide in and out, and then your snake can coil up in a truly arboreal hide. They're a really neat addition, and they're relatively easy to do. You just side mount your tracking so they're facing one another at a set distance, and a lot of these black plastic pre-formed hides that you get come with a good sort of 10-12 mil lip, so if distance right, it will just slide in and lock onto the ceiling. And again, that can't be too close to onto our no man's land, so that we make sure that we're not going to overheat the snake. But a lot of snakes, even snakes you would absolutely say would not use this, will be up there, including royal pythons and things like that as well. Get really inventive with the way that you set your tank up. Try and stay true roughly to where they're from. Royal pythons, Ghana, Togo, Benin. Corn snakes, so they would be Florida, Georgia, North and South Carolina, a lot of farmland, grassland, so they would definitely benefit from the shrub effects. You know, they're not rainforest, they don't need billowing pothos and other stuff. You know, it'd be better to have almost heathers and grasses and things that simulate the sort of stuff that they would be around. And then obviously bearded dragons, semi-desert, sparse shrubbery, so maybe some nice flat stones, some basking stone platforms. Make sure they're siliconed in place and secure so that they're not going to fall and damage the animal. Just really get inventive, and remember, whatever we sell you from the shop is a starting block. It's not the end. An aspiration is ongoing, and the aspiration to get better should be ongoing. As much as we advertise that we sell a full beardy kit, it isn't the end of the road. And certainly as new technology comes on, or we get a new form of UV lighting, when LED diodes finally catch up with what the guys need or want at Reptile Lighting when they're doing their research, they're not quite there yet from what I understand, reading between the lines, but these products are going to start rolling out, and then, you know, you've got to step up and keep moving forwards, keep on keeping on, and it's an onward journey. We look forward to trying to help you. This was really basic. It's a long video really, just for very basic things, but this really, if I'd have thought about it longer and had a script and prepared a bit better, I'd have probably put it into the first video. So this is just more an addendum. This is part 2 to the video that I posted the other day. I hope it's been useful. We'll come back with some more, and we'll see you again soon. Cheers guys.